It was a typical Thursday evening when I arrived home from work. After a long week filled with endless meetings and conference calls, I was excited to spend some quality time with my wife, Amanda. We had been married for 14 years, and though life had its ups and downs, we had always managed to work through everything together. We had two children, Ella and Max, and I had always believed we had a strong, loving family. But on this particular evening, everything would change. I pulled into the driveway of our home in the quiet suburb, the house I had poured so much of my heart into. The walls that held the laughter of our children, the backyard where we had spent countless hours together, building memories. As I entered the front door, I immediately noticed the silence. Usually, I would hear the faint sound of Ella practicing her piano or Max playing video games in the living room. But today, there was only a heavy silence. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe Amanda was upstairs or in the kitchen preparing dinner. I called out for her, but there was no response. I walked further into the house, my heart already starting to race. I walked through the kitchen, but it was completely empty. I stopped in my tracks when I saw Amanda's phone lying on the kitchen counter, unlocked. Now, I had never been the type to snoop. I had always trusted Amanda completely, and that trust was one of the foundations of our relationship. But something inside me, something I couldn't explain, told me that I should look at her phone. Maybe it was the silence in the house or the strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, but I picked up her phone and unlocked it without hesitation. It was a decision I would come to regret for the rest of my life. As I scrolled through her messages, my stomach turned. There in black and white were messages from someone I had never heard of, Jason. They were flirtatious at first, but as I kept reading, they became more intimate. I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I couldn't breathe. My hands started to shake as I read the words, "I miss you. I can't wait to see you again tonight." And, "You mean so much to me." I've never felt this way before. The last message was the one that broke me completely. "He doesn't understand me the way you do. You make me feel alive," it read. My world collapsed. The woman I had loved for so many years, the woman I had trusted, had been carrying on an affair with this man for months, and I had been oblivious to it. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that everything I had believed in, everything I had worked so hard to build, was a lie. I dropped the phone on the counter, my hands trembling. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't process what I had just read. For a moment, it felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I stood there, staring at the phone, unable to move, unable to speak. I didn't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. It was Amanda. She had come home. I turned to face her, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaky but steady. She gave me a tired smile, clearly not expecting what was coming. "What's wrong?" she asked, clearly oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. I didn't even wait for her to take off her shoes. "I know about Jason," I said, my voice cold, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. Her expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly masked it with a nonchalant shrug. "What are you talking about?" she said, her tone defensive, almost dismissive. I took a deep breath and pointed to her phone on the counter. "I found the messages. I know everything, Amanda. You've been seeing him behind my back." Her face went pale, and for the first time I saw something resembling guilt flicker in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by something else, something I hadn't expected. She laughed. It wasn't a laugh of remorse. It was a laugh of deflection, as if the whole thing were a joke. "Oh, come on, Ethan. You're overreacting," she said, rolling her eyes. "It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything." "Just a fling?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been having an affair with him for months, and you call it a fling?" The words felt like venom in my mouth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could she be so dismissive, so cavalier about something that had shattered my world? She crossed her arms and looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's not a big deal. We weren't even married when it happened," she said. "And it's not like it was anything serious." "You've been distant lately, Ethan. You haven't been there for me. You haven't been listening to me." "Jason listens to me. He makes me feel heard." I was speechless. The words stung more than I could have imagined. How had it come to this? The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was standing in front of me, justifying her betrayal. I had spent 14 years building a family, a future, and now she was telling me it meant nothing to her. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice sharp. "It's done now." "I'm done, Ethan." And with that, she slipped off her wedding ring, looked me dead in the eye, and walked out the door. She didn't even look back. I stood there frozen as the door clicked shut behind her. The sound echoed in the empty house, and for the first time, I realized I was no longer the man I once was. My world had collapsed in an instant, and I had no idea how to put it back together. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just let this go. I had to confront this. I had to find out everything, and I wasn't going to let her walk away without facing the consequences of her actions. After Amanda walked out of the door, my world felt like it had just come undone. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't escape, one where the people you love most betray you in the most unimaginable ways. I stood in the silence of our home, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I had to confront her, but I wasn't sure how I could even begin to face her. For the next few hours, I sat in the same spot, the same space where we'd shared so many memories. I couldn't get the image of her slipping off her wedding ring out of my mind. The moment she left, it was as if everything we'd built together, our marriage, our family, had been erased in an instant. How could she do this? How could she so easily walk out on me, on our children? The tears didn't come right away. There was no dramatic breakdown, no release of all the pain and hurt I felt. It was worse. I was numb. I was frozen in disbelief, in shock. I couldn't process the reality of what had just happened. How had I been so blind? How had I not seen the signs? I stared out the window, the city lights casting long shadows across the room, but none of them provided any comfort. I picked up my phone, staring at the screen, but I didn't have the strength to call her. What could I even say? Why? Seemed so inadequate. Why did you do this to me? But deep down, I knew the answer. She had found someone else. And that someone else was a man who didn't even know the basics about her life. The man who didn't know how many spoons we kept in the kitchen drawer, but somehow he was enough to make her betray everything we had. It was then that I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to go after her. I couldn't let this drag out any longer. I couldn't let her think she could walk away without facing the consequences. So, I grabbed my jacket, left the house, and got into my car. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to find her. I had to confront her, face to face, and demand an explanation. I drove through the empty streets, my mind racing with questions, each one more unbearable than the last. How long had she been seeing him? What was I missing? How could she betray me like this and still act like everything was fine? And then, the thought struck me. What about our kids? What about the family we built together? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a message from Amanda. I froze. I hadn't expected her to reach out to me. The message was short, simple. "We need to talk." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me as I typed back, "No, Amanda, you don't get to make the rules here. You don't get to walk away from this." I didn't give her a chance to respond. I couldn't. I couldn't wait for her to justify her actions, her betrayal. I needed answers now. I arrived at the hotel where I knew she was staying. The same hotel, I realized, where she had been sneaking off to meet Jason. My stomach churned as I parked the car. Every part of me wanted to storm inside, to confront her, to drag her back to face what she had done. But I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. I walked into the hotel lobby and made my way to the elevator. When I stepped out on the top floor, I felt the adrenaline surge through my veins. This was it. This was where I was going to finally get the answers I deserved. The hallway stretched before me, quiet and sterile. I reached her room, knocked on the door, and waited. There was no answer at first. I knocked again, this time louder, more insistent. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching from the other side. The door creaked open, and there she was. Amanda. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock, but there was no guilt, not even a hint of regret, just that familiar defensive posture she always took when she didn't want to face the truth. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking, "what are you doing here?" "I think you know exactly why I'm here," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I want the truth. I deserve to know everything, Amanda." "Why did you do it? Why did you throw away everything we had?" Her eyes shifted away, as though the words I spoke were too much for her to handle. She opened the door wider, letting me in, and we sat down on the bed. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to let her off easy by having a calm, civil conversation, but I had no choice. I needed to hear it from her. "I don't know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen." "It started out innocent, just some attention, some affection that I wasn't getting from you anymore. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why didn't you talk to me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you come to me? We could have worked through whatever was going on. We've been together for 16 years, Amanda. Why did you let it go this far?" "I don't know," she repeated, her eyes welling up with tears. "I was lonely." "You were always busy. We just drifted apart, and Jason made me feel seen. He made me feel wanted again. And I was weak." "You think I wasn't busy too? You think I wasn't trying?" My anger flared up again, but I fought it back. I couldn't let her manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. "You don't get to blame me for your mistakes, Amanda. This was all on you, and now our family is broken because of it." Her face twisted with guilt and shame. For the first time, I saw something other than the defensive wall she had put up. She wasn't justifying her actions anymore. She was ashamed. But was that enough? I looked at her for a long time, trying to process what was happening. My wife, the woman I had loved for years, had betrayed me. And now she was sitting there, asking for forgiveness. But could I forgive her? Could I forget what she had done? Could I trust her again? "I don't know what to say, Amanda," I said quietly. "You've destroyed everything. I don't even know who you are anymore." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears falling down her face. "I never meant for it to go this far. Please, please forgive me." But I wasn't sure I could. I wasn't sure I wanted to, because how do you forgive someone who broke your trust so completely? How do you go back to the way things were when everything feels shattered? I arrived at the hotel where I knew she was staying. The place felt empty in the way a home does after it's been abandoned, a hollow echo of everything that was once there. I parked my car, gripping the wheel as my thoughts spiraled out of control. Was I doing the right thing? What did I expect to happen when I finally confronted her? Was I even prepared for the answers I might get? I took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance, the cold night air biting at my skin. The lobby was quiet, far too quiet for what I was about to do. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her eyes scanning me with a mix of curiosity and judgment. I didn't care. I wasn't here for her. I wasn't here for anyone. I was here for Amanda, and it was time to face the consequences of her actions. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice polite but wary. "I'm looking for room 207, I said, my voice low and steady. I wasn't angry yet, but I could feel it building inside of me. I could feel the cold rage that had been simmering since the moment Amanda left. "Are you Mr. Hayes?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. She pressed a button on the desk, and the elevator doors opened immediately. I didn't need to say anything more. I stepped inside, the sound of the elevator humming in the otherwise silent building. It seemed like it took an eternity to reach the second floor, but finally, the doors opened, and I found myself standing in front of her door. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't hesitate. I knocked 3 times, each thud of my fist reverberating down the empty hallway. When the door opened, Amanda stood there in front of me, her face as pale as the moonlight shining through the windows. "Amanda," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." She looked at me for a moment, and I saw the guilt in her eyes. It wasn't the same defensiveness she had when I found out about her affair with Jason. This time, there was something else, something softer, something almost vulnerable, but I wasn't ready to see her vulnerability. Not yet. Not when everything felt like it had been ripped out from under me. "Ethan, I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice shaking, her eyes darting nervously. "I thought you would just let it go." "I can't let it go," I replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You don't get to make decisions like that and expect me to just accept it. You don't get to walk out of our marriage and act like it was nothing." She shut the door behind me, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ethan. You have to believe me. I wasn't happy." "I haven't been happy for a long time, but I never meant to hurt you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to justify this, trying to act like this was some kind of minor mistake that could just be swept under the rug. "I don't care how unhappy you were," I snapped, my voice rising, but I quickly swallowed my anger. "You made a choice. You chose him. You chose Jason over me, over our family, and now I'm supposed to just accept that?" Amanda didn't respond immediately. She stood there in silence, her eyes welling with tears, but she didn't make a move toward me. The guilt was written all over her face, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to forgive her, to forget what she had done. "I never meant for it to happen, Ethan," she said again, her voice breaking. "I was lonely. I was scared." Jason made me feel like I mattered again, like I was someone. I made a mistake. I was weak. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice steady but bitter. "You were weak, and that's why everything is falling apart. You're not the person I married, Amanda. You've become someone else entirely." I could feel the wall she had built between us slowly crumbling, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't let her off the hook so easily. I needed more. I needed the truth. "You don't get to call the shots here anymore," I said. "You don't get to decide how this ends. I do." Amanda collapsed onto the bed, her hands covering her face. She was crying now, and I could hear the sobs racking through her body. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. I had no more pity left for her, not after everything she had done. "You think this is easy for me?" she choked out between sobs. "You think I didn't feel guilty? I've been carrying this guilt for so long and I didn't know how to fix it." "You don't fix it by running away and sleeping with someone else," I said, my words sharp. "You fix it by facing your problems, by being honest with the people you love, by not betraying them." The silence between us stretched on, thick and heavy. I could feel the weight of what we had lost pressing down on both of us, but I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. "I don't know what's going to happen next," I said finally, standing up to leave. "But I know one thing. I'm not going to keep pretending everything is okay. You've shattered this family, Amanda, and now it's up to me to pick up the pieces." I walked out of the room, leaving her there, broken and regretful, and stepped back into the cold hallway. The silence that followed me felt deafening, but it was the only thing that made sense in that moment. It was the silence of a marriage that had been destroyed, the silence of a family falling apart, and yet, somehow, it was the only peace I had left. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't seem to focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amanda's face the moment she took off her wedding ring and left me. The betrayal burned deep, and I couldn't escape it. Our family, the life we had built together, was all just a house of cards, crumbling with one flick of the hand. It was difficult to breathe without feeling the weight of it pressing down on my chest. I went to work, and I went through the motions, but my heart wasn't there. It couldn't be. How could I keep pretending everything was normal when my entire world had been turned upside down? I tried to focus, to bury myself in tasks and deadlines, but it was impossible. Every call, every email felt hollow, and all the while, Amanda was out there, living her life with Jason or whoever else. I couldn't even bring myself to ask. The phone call from Silas, her lover, still echoed in my mind. "She's with me now." His cold voice rang, each syllable like a blade cutting through what little dignity I had left. It was one thing for her to leave, but for him to rub it in my face was something I hadn't prepared for. But I was done being a victim. I had to take control, even if it meant facing the truth that I didn't want to see. I called my lawyer, Rob. He had been a friend before he became the one to pick up the pieces of my broken life. Rob had seen me go through the ups and downs of my marriage, and now he was the one who would guide me through the hardest part, divorce. I told him what had happened, and as always, his voice was calm, practical. "Ethan, we're going to handle this the right way," he said. "We'll get the custody arrangements sorted out, but we need to make sure that we have everything in place. Financial documents, evidence of her behavior, the property, everything. You need to be prepared for a battle. She won't go down without a fight." "Do you think she'll try to take the girls?" I asked, my throat tightening at the thought. "Maybe," Rob said, his voice soft, "but we have the law on our side. Don't worry about that. The most important thing now is to stay calm. Don't let her manipulate you into doing something you'll regret." I nodded, though I didn't feel calm. The idea of losing my daughters, of watching Amanda try to turn their world into her own personal battleground, was something I wasn't sure I could survive. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. Not after everything she had done. The following days felt like a fight that was only beginning. I stayed focused on the practical things, like getting the divorce papers in order, setting up meetings with the school, and making sure the girls were okay. They didn't know the full extent of what was happening. They were too young to understand why Mommy wasn't home anymore, but they could feel it. I saw it in their eyes, the confusion, the quiet sadness that settled over them when Amanda wasn't there. It was on a Friday afternoon, a few weeks after the confrontation, that the next bombshell hit. I had just finished picking the girls up from school when Rob called me. His tone was grave, and I could tell something had happened. "You need to come by the office," he said. "I've got something you need to see." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my coat and told the girls to stay in the car while I went inside for a minute. They were fine. They didn't even ask where I was going anymore. They had stopped asking questions about where Mommy was, and I felt that pang in my chest again, the same one that had been there every time I had to explain why she wasn't home, why she wasn't coming back. When I entered Rob's office, he was already holding a file in his hands. It was thick, filled with documents, and I could tell from the way he was holding it that it was important. "Ethan," Rob began, his voice steady, "I don't know how to say this, but we have evidence that Amanda has been hiding assets." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Her accounts are emptying out. There are large transfers to an unknown account and some of her recent credit card charges. They don't line up with what she's been telling you. We've been tracking her financials for the last few weeks, and we found something that could affect your custody case." I leaned in, my hands suddenly clammy. "What are you saying?" "Is she hiding money?" "Not just money," Rob replied, his expression grim. "It looks like she's been planning something. She's been talking to Silas about selling the Brooklyn condo. Ethan, it's all part of the divorce, and she's trying to move everything into his name. She's trying to cut you out entirely." My mind reeled. I could feel the weight of the last few weeks crashing down on me. Amanda had already taken so much. Now she was trying to take everything I had left, my home, my stability, and my daughter's future, but I couldn't let her win. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we had built. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it fast. "Let's move forward," I said, my voice firm. "I want to fight this. I'm not going to let her steal everything from me." The days following my confrontation with Amanda felt like I was living in a limbo, suspended between the past and the future. The past held the weight of everything we had shared. Memories, laughs, milestones. The future. It was a fog of uncertainty where I had no idea what would happen next. I couldn't quite bring myself to believe the finality of it all. Amanda had left, and I was suddenly thrust into the role of being a single father, a role I had never anticipated and certainly didn't want. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and all I could do now was face them head on. My first priority was the girls. They were too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, but they knew something was wrong. They could feel the absence of their mother in ways that words couldn't explain. Lena was quieter now, and Mira had taken to drawing pictures of our family, each one with a glaring hole where her mother's figure should have been. It broke my heart, but I tried not to show it. I needed to be strong for them. I knew that they would look to me for stability, and I wasn't about to let them down. Work had become my escape, but it also held its own set of challenges. Every day felt like I was wearing a mask, pretending that everything was fine when inside, my emotions were a whirlpool of anger, confusion, and fear. I threw myself into projects, deadlines, anything that could distract me from the suffocating weight of my new reality. But the more I tried to move forward, the more I realized how much I was still tethered to the past. Then came the legal documents. Rob had sent me the preliminary divorce papers, and I knew that it was time to take the next step. I couldn't just sit back and let Amanda dictate the terms of this. I had to fight for what was right, for my daughters, for myself, and for the future we all deserved. I sat down with the papers, a bitter taste in my mouth. The terms were everything I feared. Amanda was trying to get as much as possible, even trying to gain control over the Brooklyn condo, which, according to the law, was still under my name. She had tried to claim it as a marital asset, but I had no intention of letting her get away with it. The more I read, the more I realized how much she had been planning behind the scenes. Silas was involved in this too, and I could sense that she had been orchestrating everything to her advantage, trying to set herself up for some new life without regard for the consequences of her actions on me or the girls. I set the papers down and took a long, slow breath. This wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about the betrayal. It was about the fact that she had been unfaithful, lied to me, and broken the trust that had taken years to build. It was about the way she had abandoned our family, and now she was trying to manipulate her way out of the mess she created. I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let her use the system to cover up her mistakes. I made the call to Rob. The conversation was brief but decisive. I want to fight this, I told him. We need to make sure that everything is in my favor. Full custody of the girls, no visitation unless she shows real proof that she can be a responsible parent. I'm done playing nice. I'll get started, Rob said, his voice low but steady. You've made the right decision, Ethan. This isn't about revenge. This is about protecting what matters most. Your daughters and your future. As soon as the call ended, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I wasn't going to let Amanda pull the strings anymore. The situation had gone far beyond what I had ever imagined, but now I had a plan, I had a purpose, and I was going to stick to it no matter what. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Every spare moment was spent gathering evidence, meeting with Rob, and preparing for the inevitable legal battle. I spent hours going over the girls' schedules, making sure they had everything they needed for school, their extracurricular activities, and their emotional well-being. I wanted to show that I was the better parent, the one who would always be there for them, no matter what Amanda tried to do. I wasn't just fighting for custody, I was fighting for their future. Then one day, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. I received a call from the school. It was the principal, and her voice was strained, as if she was trying to hold back something important. Mr. Hayes, she said, I think you need to come to school. There's been an incident with Mira. My heart skipped a beat. What happened? I asked, my voice tight. It's nothing major, she replied quickly, but Mira has been upset. She mentioned something about her mother, and she's been a little withdrawn today. I think we need to talk. I didn't wait for her to finish. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and rushed to the school. When I arrived, I was ushered into the principal's office where Mira was sitting with her teacher. Her face was pale and she looked like she had been crying. Mira, I said gently, kneeling down to her level. What's going on? She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Daddy, where's Mommy? The question hit me like a punch in the gut. I had been avoiding telling them the full truth, but now it was becoming impossible to hide. I looked at her teacher, who nodded slightly, as if to say that it was time. I took a deep breath. Mommy's not coming back, I said softly. But you and Lena are with me now. We're going to be okay. Mira didn't cry. She just looked at me with those big, trusting eyes, as if she was trying to make sense of it all. Lena, her older sister, was more withdrawn than usual, her eyes full of questions she couldn't yet express. But I knew that I had to stay strong. I had to be the anchor for them, no matter what. After talking to the school, I took the girls home and spent the evening trying to distract them with games and stories. But my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the legal battle ahead, the lies Amanda had told, and the way she had used me and the girls as pawns in her game. I was done being passive. I had to take control of the situation for their sake and mine. The days after that conversation with Rob felt like a blur, but there was one thing that was clear. The battle was no longer just about the house, the money, or the betrayal. It was about the future, my daughter's future, and whether or not we could survive the wreckage Amanda had left behind. I threw myself into the legal preparations. Every spare minute was spent gathering documents, making phone calls, and meeting with Rob. It was exhausting. Every piece of evidence I collected felt like a nail in the coffin of the life Amanda and I had once shared. I had to face the cold, hard truth. She had used me. She had used my love, my commitment, and our family as a pawn in her own game of escape, and now she was trying to get away with it. But not on my watch. I spent my nights in the study, looking over the evidence, financial records, texts, the logs of her secretive trips. It was all laid out before me, and I couldn't stop looking at it. Amanda's lies were meticulously crafted, and it took me hours to piece together the timeline of her betrayal. She had been planning this for months, and I hadn't even seen it coming. Then there was the issue of the girls. How would I explain all of this to them? I could see the confusion in their eyes. They missed their mother, even though they could feel the absence. Lena, my sensitive one, had started asking more questions, and Mira, who had always been the quieter one, had begun to withdraw even more. I wanted to shield them from the truth, to protect them from the ugly reality of their mother's actions, but I knew I couldn't keep them in the dark forever. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table looking over some papers, Lena came up to me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. "Daddy," she said softly, "is Mommy coming back?" I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't speak. How do you answer that question when the truth is too painful? How do you explain to a little girl that her mother is not coming back, at least not the way she remembers her? I reached out, pulling Lena into my arms. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Mommy is going to take some time away, but don't worry, you and Mira will always have me. I will always be here for you, okay?" Lena nodded, though I could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. She didn't fully understand, and I didn't know how to make her understand without breaking her heart. The next few weeks were filled with more of these moments, moments when I had to lie, not out of malice, but out of necessity. I lied to protect their innocence, to shield them from the reality of their mother's actions. But deep down, I knew that the time would come when I couldn't hide the truth from them any longer. And when that time came, I had to be ready. I thought about the future often, especially in the quiet moments at night when the girls were asleep. What would my life look like now? What would their lives look like? How could I rebuild everything I had lost, piece by piece, for their sake? In the midst of all the chaos, I also found moments of peace. When I spent time with the girls, when we played games or watched movies together, it felt like everything was okay. For a while. But as soon as the laughter faded and the house grew quiet, the weight of everything came rushing back. The legal battle was looming, and I knew it would be ugly. Amanda's lawyer, Preston Levanter, was already building a case. He was trying to manipulate the situation, using every trick in the book to paint me as an unfit father, as someone who couldn't provide stability for the girls. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't going to let him or Amanda use me as a pawn in their game. One morning, Rob called me with some news. "We've got the documents we need," he said. "We're going to file for full custody of the girls." It's time to take the gloves off. I knew it was coming. I knew that once the papers were filed, there would be no turning back. The war would begin, and I had to be ready for it. I was ready for it. For the sake of my daughters, I would fight until the end. I had learned a lot during this time. I had learned how to let go of my anger, how to stop being reactive and start being proactive. I had learned that love wasn't about what you said, but what you did. I had learned that silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. And most importantly, I had learned that no matter how far Amanda tried to run, no matter how many lies she told, I would always be there for my daughters. I would be their constant, their rock. But as I prepared to file for custody, something unexpected happened. Amanda called me. Her voice was shaky, like she wasn't sure if she had the strength to speak. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "I want to talk. Can we meet?" I froze, the phone in my hand feeling heavier than it ever had before. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. The moment I would finally have to face Amanda face to face. After everything, after all the pain and betrayal, was I ready to hear what she had to say? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of this anymore. The girls were mine to protect now, and I wasn't going to let her tear them apart any more than she already had. I agreed to meet her. The days after the conversation with Amanda lingered in my mind like a slow-moving fog, clouding everything I thought I understood about our relationship. The truth was undeniable, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the reality was there, staring me in the face. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that Amanda seemed to have no remorse for it. She had walked out on me, on our daughters, on everything we had built, and when she did, it felt like she was saying that none of it mattered. I could still hear the cold, emotionless words she had spoken. "He listens better than you ever did." Those words replayed over and over in my mind, each time they cut deeper. But there was no time to wallow in my grief. I had to focus on the girls. They needed me, and in the quiet moments after they went to bed, I would take stock of everything that had changed. It felt like a lifetime ago when I could come home from work and hear them laughing, their voices echoing through the halls. Now, the house felt hollow. Lena and Mira's schoolwork, their routines, everything seemed to fall into place, but the absence of their mother was like an open wound, one that I couldn't hide from them for much longer. I didn't want to burden them with the truth, but they were perceptive. Mira, who had always been the quieter of the two, had started asking questions. She would look up at me with wide eyes and say things like, "Why does Mommy always leave the house now?" Or, "Why doesn't Mommy come to the park with us?" Those questions were the hardest to answer. How could I explain to my daughter that her mother had chosen someone else? How could I tell her that everything they had known was being torn apart in front of them? I began to realize that there were no easy answers. There would never be a perfect moment to tell them the truth, and yet there was an urgency to it. I couldn't let them grow up thinking that the absence of their mother was normal. I couldn't let them live with the lie any longer. One evening, as the girls were finishing up their homework, I sat them down on the couch. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my palms were sweating as I tried to find the right words. Lena looked at me, her eyes wide with curiosity, while Mira sat silently, twisting the end of her braid. "Girls," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I need to talk to you about something important." Lena perked up immediately, sensing the seriousness in my tone. Mira, ever the observer, didn't look up, but I could feel her attention on me. "I know things have been different lately," I continued, taking a deep breath. "And I want to make sure you understand why." I paused for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, but it was hard. How do you explain something like this to children? How do you protect them from a reality that is too much for them to bear? "Your mom and I have been having problems," I said quietly, "and she's been making some decisions that have hurt our family. She's not coming home right now, but I want you to know that I'm here." "I'm not going anywhere." Lena's face scrunched in confusion. "But why is she gone, Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard. "Your mom has decided to live with someone else for a while," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I know it's confusing, and I'm sorry, but I need you to know that this has nothing to do with you two. I will always be here for you. You're not alone." There was silence. Mira, the quieter one, was the first to speak. "Is Mommy coming back?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I felt my heart shatter all over again. How could I tell her that her mother was gone for good? How could I explain that the woman who had once promised to love us forever had walked away without a second glance? "I don't know," I said softly. "But what I do know is that I'm here, and you don't have to worry. We'll get through this together." Lena's eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in my chest. I held her close, the weight of her grief settling in my bones. Mira looked up at me, her expression still blank, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I love you, Daddy," Lena whispered, her voice muffled by my shirt. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." The rest of the evening was spent in silence. I tucked them into bed as usual, but it felt different now. There was no more pretending. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As I sat in the living room later that night, the weight of the situation settled in fully. Amanda was gone, and it wasn't just a temporary thing. She had made her choice, and now, so had I. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I had made my decision. I would fight for my daughters. I would protect them from the lies, from the manipulation, and from the destruction Amanda had caused. I was done being the victim. I was done waiting for things to go back to how they were. It was time to start over, to rebuild, and to ensure that my daughters would grow up in a home filled with love, stability, and truth. The next day, as I made my way to the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let Amanda destroy the family we had built. I wasn't going to let her get away with using me as a pawn in her game. But as I sat in the conference room with Rob and the lawyer, something unexpected happened. I looked across the table at the lawyer's face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. The battle was just beginning, but I wasn't alone anymore, and this time, I was going to win. The following days passed in a blur of endless paperwork, phone calls, and legal consultations. I was entering a battle I never imagined I would have to fight, one that involved more than just the betrayal of a wife. It involved the future of my children, their sense of security, and their lives moving forward. The pain of the betrayal, the emotional toll of it all, was now overshadowed by the fierce determination that had taken root in me. I could no longer be passive. I had to take action for the sake of the girls. Amanda had made her choice, and it wasn't just about her leaving me. It was about how she left, without looking back, without remorse, without any consideration of the damage she was causing to our family. Her disappearance into the arms of Silas had left a wound that wouldn't easily heal, but I had to hold it together. For Lena, for Mira, they were still my daughters, and I was still their father. No matter what Amanda did, I had to ensure they would grow up safe, loved, and supported. The first thing I did was reach out to a lawyer. Rob Kinley was a seasoned attorney, and he didn't waste any time once I shared the details of my situation. "You've been through hell," he said after hearing me out, "but it's time to focus on your future, not hers. We'll get through this." The reality of the legal process hit me hard in the beginning. As a man who had always tried to keep things as peaceful as possible, the prospect of a drawn-out battle in court was terrifying. But then, a certain clarity took over. Amanda had made her bed, and now it was time to lay down the consequences of her actions. The first step was to secure full custody of Lena and Mira. I didn't want to do this as a way to get back at Amanda. This was about protecting my children. Amanda's lawyer, Preston Levanter, was a well-dressed man, polished in his mannerisms and his speech. He had that air of someone who thought they could control any situation. But what Preston didn't know was that I wasn't interested in playing games anymore. The days of tiptoeing around Amanda's whims, of trying to hold on to a family that had been torn apart by her choices, were over. The first meeting with Preston took place in a sleek conference room at his firm. The modern glass walls, the carefully arranged furniture, the cold atmosphere, it all made the situation feel even more alien to me. But I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to protect my daughters. Preston greeted me with a handshake, his expression all business. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming, he said in a voice that almost seemed rehearsed. I'm sure we can come to some agreement here. I gave him a nod, staying calm, keeping my emotions in check. I'm not here to make deals, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm here for my daughters. Preston shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes narrowing. I understand. But there are legal procedures we need to follow. I'm sure you want what's best for the girls. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze fixed on his. What's best for them is to be in a stable environment, not one that's been destroyed by a lie. I don't care about your fancy legal arguments. I care about my children. Preston seemed to regain his composure, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, maybe even fear. He knew that I wasn't going to back down. The conversation turned to the division of assets, the Brooklyn condo, the bank accounts. He kept referring to Amanda as though she were a victim in all of this, as though I were the one who had wronged her. I could feel my blood pressure rising. How could he sit there and act like Amanda hadn't abandoned me and the kids? How could he keep portraying her as the innocent party when she was the one who had betrayed everything? The meeting ended with no real resolution. Preston promised he would discuss the terms with Amanda and get back to me. But I knew the truth. This wasn't going to be easy. And there was a part of me that had expected as much. Amanda's new life with Silas was about to collide with the reality of what she had left behind, and when it did, she would see just how far I was willing to go to protect what mattered most. I didn't tell Lena or Mira about the meeting. I didn't want to burden them with the details of the battle that was now unfolding in front of us. They were still so young, and I wanted them to feel safe in their world, despite everything that was happening. But I could tell they were picking up on my emotions. Lena had been especially quiet lately, and Mira, usually full of questions, had started withdrawing into herself. I knew they were scared. They had every right to be, but I couldn't afford to let fear control me anymore. I had to be the rock, the steady force in their lives. I had to be the father they deserved. In the days that followed, I spent hours reviewing financial documents, gathering evidence, and preparing for the next legal steps. It felt like an endless mountain of paperwork, but I knew I had to climb it if I wanted to protect my daughters. The one thing I couldn't allow was for Amanda to come back and tear apart the stability I was trying so desperately to build for them. I spent evenings working on my case while the girls were asleep, keeping to my routine to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But every time I saw their faces, Lena's concerned expression and Mira's sad eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing them too. They were still adjusting to the absence of their mother, and I wasn't sure how much longer they would be able to ignore the impact her betrayal had on their world. The next legal step was crucial. It was time to file for full custody. I had already made my decision, and nothing would change my mind. Amanda had made her choice, and I was now making mine. I would fight for the girls, for their future, and for the stability they deserved. The legal battle was just beginning, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't lose this fight. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of court hearings, motions, and negotiations. The legal world, once something I had only heard of in passing, had now become my reality. The incessant emails, the sleepless nights spent reviewing documents, the cold, sterile atmosphere of the courtroom, everything seemed to blur into one never-ending battle. I was no longer just a father protecting his children from the fallout of his wife's betrayal. I was a man who had seen everything he built come crashing down, and now I had to rebuild from the ashes, brick by brick. The truth was out there, but the world seemed to be determined to test my resolve, pushing me to the edge. Amanda had made her move, and now it was my turn. The custody battle had taken a life of its own. I knew the courts could be unpredictable, and I knew the kind of woman Amanda had become. The woman who had thrown away everything we had for Silas and, in the process, had left the pieces of our family scattered across the floor. The first court appearance was almost surreal. It wasn't my first time in a courtroom, but it was certainly the first time I'd walked in with everything on the line. The lawyer I had hired, Rob Kinley, was a force to be reckoned with. He was thorough, sharp, and had a way of making every argument seem like a foregone conclusion. We arrived early, walking through the imposing doors of the family court, a place that felt more like a battleground than a place for justice. I kept my composure, but deep inside I could feel the tension mounting. The girls were with my sister, who had been incredibly supportive throughout this whole ordeal. I hadn't wanted to bring them to court, not just yet. They didn't need to see this. The first to arrive was Amanda's lawyer, Preston Levanter. He was the same as ever, sharp suit, perfectly groomed, the kind of man who had mastered the art of looking like he was in control of everything. But today, he didn't seem so sure of himself. Perhaps it was the mounting pressure. Perhaps it was the fact that Amanda's game was unraveling, and she had no idea how to stop it. Amanda arrived next, looking as poised as ever, but I saw the cracks in her composure. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine as though she didn't want to acknowledge the man she had betrayed. She had no idea what she was about to face. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way she kept glancing nervously at her lawyer. The judge was a woman named Judge Roberts, an older woman who exuded calm authority. She looked at me first, her eyes soft but keen, then turned to Amanda, her gaze narrowing just slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "I understand we're here today to discuss custody arrangements for the children," Judge Roberts began, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Let's keep this civil. I expect no theatrics, no grandstanding." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest, but I wasn't going to back down. This was no longer about Amanda and me. This was about Lena and Mira, their future, their well-being. Rob Kinley stood first, addressing the court with a quiet confidence. "Your Honor, my client seeks full custody of his daughters. The evidence of his wife's abandonment and betrayal is clear, and we believe it is in the best interest of the children to remain with their father, who has been the steady presence in their lives." I watched as Preston shifted in his seat, his face betraying a hint of discomfort. "Your Honor, we are requesting joint custody," he said smoothly, though there was an underlying desperation in his voice. "Mrs. Hayes has not abandoned her children. This case is about personal differences, not about neglecting the children's needs." Judge Roberts didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced down at the file before her, then looked at Amanda. "Mrs. Hayes, is there anything you would like to add?" Amanda was silent for a moment, her hands clutching the edge of the table. She finally spoke, but her voice lacked the certainty it once had. I I just want what's best for my children," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I made mistakes, but I love them." "They need me." I could see the weakness in her words. It was clear to anyone in the room that Amanda wasn't the person she once was. The woman I had once loved had become a stranger, and it was impossible to ignore the selfishness and entitlement she now carried. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about the consequences of her actions. Judge Roberts listened carefully before responding. "This court takes the welfare of children very seriously. I will take all of this into account before making a ruling. However, based on the evidence presented today, I am inclined to award full custody to Mr. Hayes." The words hit me like a ton of bricks, but they didn't feel like a victory. They felt like the start of a new chapter, one that was going to be difficult and full of challenges, but one that I was ready for. The case didn't end that day, but the decision was a turning point. Amanda's defense had no real merit. There were too many inconsistencies in her story, too many signs that she had abandoned her role as a mother, and I couldn't let her pull the wool over the court's eyes. The judge had made it clear. My daughters belonged with me. As the day drew to a close, I walked out of the courtroom, my mind focused on one thing and one thing only: my daughters. They were safe. They were loved, and that was all that mattered. In the weeks that followed, the legal battle for custody continued, but I began to feel like the worst was behind me. Amanda had not only betrayed me emotionally, but now, in the eyes of the law, she was showing the world that she couldn't be trusted with the most important thing: our children. The weight of the final court date loomed large. I knew Amanda had been fighting hard, clinging to the remnants of her life with Silas, trying to keep the illusion of control. But I was no longer the man I was months ago. I had become someone stronger, someone who could stand in the face of her manipulation and remain unshaken. My lawyer, Rob Kinley, had been invaluable. He never once wavered, always keeping his focus on what mattered, my daughters. The conversations we had in the lead up to the final hearing were filled with strategy and resolve, not anger or desperation. I knew the truth, and I was prepared to fight for it with everything I had. The final court day arrived, and I could sense the tension in the air. The courtroom was full, lawyers, witnesses, and the usual spectators. But this time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I'd come to terms with the fact that my life had changed forever, and I wasn't going to allow anyone, not even Amanda, to undermine my role as a father. Amanda's lawyer, Preston Levanter, was still playing his cards, but I could tell that the tides had turned. As he walked into the room, I noticed his stiff posture, his carefully arranged tie, and the slight tension in his jaw. He wasn't as confident as he once was. It was clear that despite his best efforts, the evidence had stacked against Amanda. The judge, Judge Roberts, entered the room. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. She had been fair throughout the proceedings, and I could sense she was prepared to make a decision today. "Let's get to the matter at hand," Judge Roberts began, her voice steady and measured. "We've heard both sides. Mr. Hayes, you have presented a compelling case for full custody. Mrs. Hayes, you've made your arguments as well. Now it's time to make a decision." I sat still, my hands resting on the table in front of me, my mind focused. The only thing that mattered now was the future of my children. Judge Roberts looked down at the file in front of her and then glanced up at Amanda. "Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything further to add?" Amanda shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable. She had lost much of the composure she had once carried. She looked at the table for a moment before lifting her gaze to meet the judge's. I just want what's best for my children. I love them, and I'm trying to make things right." Her words didn't have the same impact they once did. I could see the cracks in her armor. The woman who had stood so confidently in the past now looked broken, uncertain. "I believe you love your children," Judge Roberts replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But love alone is not enough. You've demonstrated a pattern of behavior that does not align with the responsibilities of a mother. Your actions, your decisions, and your lack of consistency have left your children in a vulnerable position. Mr. Hayes has shown he is capable of providing stability, security, and a loving environment for them." The words hung in the air, and I could feel a sense of relief wash over me. This was the moment I had been fighting for. Amanda was not getting away with her betrayal. I would not let her tear apart my family any longer. "After considering the evidence," Judge Roberts continued, "I am awarding full custody to Mr. Hayes. Mrs. Hayes, you will be granted visitation, but primary custody will remain with Mr. Hayes. I hope you will take this time to reflect on your actions and what is truly in the best interest of your children." I felt a surge of emotion, relief, triumph, but also a sadness that this was how things had turned out. I had wanted nothing more than to have a happy, whole family. But the truth was clear now. I had to protect my children, even if it meant letting go of the woman I once loved. Amanda's face went pale as the words sank in. I saw the reality hit her, and for the first time in this entire process, I saw a glimpse of remorse. She didn't look at me. She didn't even try to fight it. Instead, she sat in silence, staring down at her hands as the weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. As the judge finalized the ruling, I stood up, the words echoing in my mind. Full custody. I felt a weight lift off my chest. My children were safe. They were coming home with me, where they belonged. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, legal processes, and new beginnings. The reality of being a single father was both liberating and overwhelming. I had the responsibility of raising my daughters alone, but I also had the opportunity to shape their future, free from the manipulation and lies that had defined our past. Amanda, on the other hand, seemed to vanish from our lives. She didn't make any attempts to contact me or the girls. It was as if she had disappeared, leaving behind only a trail of broken promises. I had expected her to fight harder, but perhaps the weight of the loss had finally sunk in. As for me, I began to rebuild. I focused on my daughters, on their happiness, and on creating a stable, loving home. I no longer had the distractions of Amanda's lies or Silas's manipulation. It was just the three of us, starting fresh. One evening after the girls had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. I had come through the storm, and while the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, I knew one thing for certain. I was stronger than I had ever been. I had fought for my family, for my children, and I had won. I glanced at the family photos on the wall, pictures of the girls and me smiling together, carefree. I smiled softly, knowing that despite the chaos of the past, I had the strength to keep going. And most importantly, I knew that my daughters would never have to face the same heartbreak I had. I would always be there for them, no matter what. As I poured myself a glass of whiskey and looked out at the night sky, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories are not won in the courtroom or in the heat of battle. They're won in the quiet moments, when you find peace within yourself and choose to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the journey may be. The days after the ruling were a blur of paperwork and legal procedures. My world was quieter now, but the calm was only the calm before a new storm. My daughters, Lena and Mira, had returned to me, full-time. The silence in the house felt different this time, though. It wasn't just the absence of Amanda's footsteps, it was the emptiness that comes when a life that had been shared for over a decade is suddenly reduced to nothing but memories, scattered and torn apart. There were still battles to fight. The legal team on the other side, led by Preston, would not give up so easily. They were already discussing an appeal, suggesting that I was in over my head, claiming that the ruling could be reconsidered. But deep down, I knew there was no coming back for Amanda, not in the eyes of the law and not in the eyes of the children she had betrayed. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I took a long, steady breath, letting the weight of the decision lift from my chest. The girls had been with me for the past couple of weeks now, and their smiles, their laughter, their little voices asking questions about their new school, their new life, reminded me that there was still something to hold on to, something worth protecting. After the court ruling, Amanda vanished from our lives as if she had never been part of our family. There were no calls, no apologies, no attempts to reach out. In a way, it was a relief. I had expected her to fight harder, to try to manipulate me with more lies, but there was nothing, only silence. For weeks, I kept busy with work, spending every moment I could with the girls. We went on trips to parks and museums. The bond between us deepened, the three of us finding comfort in the quiet moments we spent together. But still, there was always that nagging thought in the back of my mind. What about the damage? The hurt? The lies? It wasn't until a late afternoon, a few months after the court ruling, that I saw something that would forever change my understanding of who I had become and who I was becoming. I walked in from a long day at work, my mind preoccupied with the typical worries, deadlines, phone calls, emails. As I closed the door behind me, the house was eerily quiet. I felt a brief wave of nostalgia for the days when Amanda was here, when we had made plans for dinners, made decisions together. But that was gone, vanished into thin air with nothing more than a handful of broken promises. I noticed the girls' artwork scattered across the living room table, their schoolwork, and a half-finished project on the couch. Lena's project was a drawing of our family, a simple picture of us together, surrounded by hearts. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. Lena walked in then, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, running up to me and giving me a hug. "Hey, sweetie," I said, smiling down at her. "How was school?" "Good. We had art class." Mira showed her picture, and Ms. Walters said it was the best in the class, she said, her voice full of excitement. I smiled softly. "I'm proud of you both." Mira followed her sister in, looking a bit more reserved. "Daddy, can we talk about something?" I sat down with both of them, crossing my arms, sensing something was off. "Of course." "What's on your mind?" "Mommy, she's not coming back, is she?" Mira asked, her voice quieter than usual, her small fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I froze, the words catching in my throat. I had never expected this conversation, not like this, not so soon. The honesty in Mira's eyes, her vulnerability, stung me. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell my daughters that the woman they once called Mom had chosen a path that didn't lead back to us? I'm not sure, sweetie, I said, my voice calm but heavy. But I want you both to know that no matter what happens, we're okay. You and Mira, you're my world. I'll always be here for you. Lena nodded but didn't say much more. Mira, however, leaned into me, her face sad but understanding. She didn't need to hear me say more. She already knew. That evening, after the girls went to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. I felt the weight of the past few months bearing down on me. I had won the custody battle, but the emotional war raged on. It wasn't enough to have them physically with me. I wanted to make sure they were mentally, emotionally secure, and I wasn't entirely sure I had done enough. I had shielded them from Amanda's absence, but I was starting to realize that the damage might run deeper than I had acknowledged. As I sat in the quiet, the phone buzzed on the coffee table, a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up. "Hello?" I answered, my voice steady. "Mr. Hayes," came a voice on the other end, cool and professional. "This is attorney Preston Levanter. I represent Ms. Geneva Hayes." I felt the blood rush to my face as anger simmered beneath the surface. "What is it now, Preston?" "There's been a change in the situation. Ms. Hayes is requesting to reconsider the custody agreement. She feels that she deserves a second chance," Preston continued, his tone almost mechanical. I clenched my fist. "Tell her to take it up with her lawyer. The court has made its decision, and it's final. She's had her chance. She doesn't get to undo this." Preston was silent for a moment. I could hear the faint shuffle of papers on his side of the line. "Mr. Hayes, I suggest you reconsider. If we pursue this, it could get messy. There are things you may not be aware of." I leaned forward, my voice hardening. "I know exactly what she's capable of, and I'm not afraid of her. Tell her to stay away." I hung up the phone, the tension in my chest mounting. I could feel the war coming back. The fight wasn't over. The next few days felt like a strange fog of emotions, guilt, anger, and confusion, all mixing together in a cocktail that was impossible to swallow. I tried to keep things together for Lena and Mira's sake, but deep down, the weight of everything that had happened hung over me like a dark cloud. I had done everything in my power to keep our family intact. But Amanda had shattered it, piece by piece, with every lie, every betrayal. And as I stood in the living room staring at the pile of legal papers that lay in front of me, evidence of everything I had lost, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for what we once were. The girls were in their rooms, and I was alone in the living room, sitting on the couch, sifting through the stack of documents. The house, now quiet without Amanda's presence, felt both empty and full at the same time. Empty because the woman who once shared everything with me, our dreams, our struggles, our family, was now nothing more than a distant memory. Full because, despite everything that had happened, I still had my daughters. I heard a knock at the door, and before I could even move, the door opened slowly, revealing Maria, my assistant, with a worried look on her face. She knew something had shifted in me. She had seen the strain in my face during the past few weeks. She had heard the crack in my voice when I spoke about Amanda. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked softly, stepping inside. I looked up at her, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm good. Just trying to figure everything out." Maria sat beside me, her presence calm and steady, as always. "You know, I've been watching you, and I think you're doing better than you think, but I can see that there's still a storm inside you." I nodded slowly. "I don't even know where to start, Maria. It's like I've spent so much time holding everything together, trying to protect my family, and now it feels like it's all falling apart." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, you've done everything you could. You're still doing everything for your daughters. You're a good father, and that's what matters." The words were simple, but they struck a chord with me. It was easy to forget what I still had when everything I thought I had was slipping away. My relationship with Amanda was over. Our family was broken, but I still had Lena and Mira. I had to hold on to that. The next day, I received a call from Preston Levanter's office. The voice on the other end was polite, but there was an edge to it. Mr. Hayes, we'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the next steps regarding your divorce agreement. My client, Geneva, has decided that she wants to revisit the custody arrangement. I didn't hesitate. Tell Geneva that I'm not interested in any more negotiations. The court has already made its decision. The voice on the other end tried to soften. Mr. Hayes, I understand your frustration, but we believe there's more to this than meets the eye. I suggest we meet and talk this through. It would be in everyone's best interest. I'm done talking, I replied coldly. Tell her to go through her lawyer like she did last time. The call ended, and I stood there for a moment staring at the phone in my hand. The audacity of her, even after everything, was astonishing. She had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The days after that call felt like a slow march toward inevitable confrontation. I had no illusions about Geneva's intentions. She had already shown her true colors, and now she was trying to regain control of a situation she had lost. But this time, I wasn't the man I used to be. I had learned that there was no place for weakness or indecision when it came to protecting my children. That evening, as I prepared for the upcoming meeting with my lawyer, I looked over at Lena and Mira. They were sitting on the couch, laughing together, lost in their own little world. I couldn't help but smile. They were everything to me. In them, I saw a future worth fighting for. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The battle for full custody wouldn't be easy, and Geneva would undoubtedly put up a fight. But I was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure that my girls had the stability and security they deserved. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Rob Kinley. Rob had been with me through every step of this journey, and his steady presence had been a comfort in the chaos that surrounded me. Ethan, I know things are rough right now, but we have to keep moving forward, Rob said as we sat in his office. Geneva is going to make this as difficult as she can, but we're not backing down. I nodded. I'm not backing down either. She made her choice. She abandoned this family, and now she's trying to manipulate me into giving her another chance. I won't do it. Rob looked at me with a sharp gaze. I know you won't, but we need to be prepared for everything she's going to throw at us. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything I was about to face. But there was no turning back now. I had already made my decision. I would fight for my daughters, and I wouldn't let anyone, least of all Geneva, take them from me. The day of the meeting with Geneva's lawyer arrived. I walked into the office, my heart pounding in my chest, but my mind clear and focused. I knew what I had to do. The meeting was tense from the start. Preston, Geneva's lawyer, tried to convince me that there was still room for negotiation, but I wasn't interested in negotiating anymore. The lines had been drawn, and I wasn't going to back down. I don't want any more back and forth, I said, my voice firm. I want full custody of my daughters. I want them with me, where they belong. Preston tried to argue, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I was done being manipulated. I had already lost so much. I wasn't going to let them take my daughters away from me, too. The meeting ended with no resolution, but I knew that I had made my position clear. Now, all I could do was wait for the next move, and as I walked out of that office, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. The fight wasn't over, but I was prepared to win it, whatever it took. Ethan Hayes had spent countless hours in the quiet of the new house, a space he hoped would be the starting point for himself and his children. But everything wasn't quite what he imagined. The house still hadn't become home in the truest sense. Every morning when he woke up, he still felt the absence of Geneva in certain corners of the rooms, even though she was no longer there. The pictures of his children, the paintings they'd done in school, they were all there, but it still wasn't enough to fill the emptiness that seemed to follow him around. Lena and Mira, his daughters, had started to adjust to the new life. The nights together, quiet meals, all of it had brought Ethan a sense that he could still create a family, even without their mother by their side. But on those nights when it was just him, when the house had settled into silence, he felt the crushing weight of loneliness. Surely you felt it too, the way a quiet emptiness can overpower everything else, even when you have so many things to focus on. Memories of Geneva, the family they once had, still lingered in his mind like ghosts he couldn't shake. Ethan had asked himself time and again whether there was any way to salvage this marriage, but he knew the answer. Since Geneva left, it wasn't about forgiveness anymore, it was about survival. It was about him standing firm alone and guiding his daughters through life without her to share it with. He couldn't change the past, but he could make the present better, no matter how hard it was. He'd waited for this call for a long time, a call he knew would come, but still, he wasn't prepared for it. When the phone rang that afternoon, he wasn't surprised, just resigned to the reality of what was unfolding. It was Maria, his lawyer. "Hi, Ethan." "It's Maria." Her voice came through the phone, calm but firm. Ethan remained silent, his heart sinking in his chest as he knew what this conversation was going to be about. "I've finalized all the paperwork. Everything is ready for the hearing tomorrow," Maria continued. She didn't need to say more. Her voice was the voice of authority, one that had guided him through countless legal maneuvers. But this was different. This was the final step. "Thank you, Maria. Go ahead, let's get it done." Ethan responded with a cold resolve in his voice. He hung up the phone, but the weight of the moment didn't lift. A part of him still worried, felt conflicted. Those emotions were still raw. He had thought he'd find peace after everything that had happened, but sometimes peace was the hardest thing to find. He closed his eyes, his mind flooded with memories from the old days, the days when Geneva and he were happy, when they had a future they both believed in. But now he was alone. He remembered all the times they'd been together, their wedding day, the first time they held their daughters, all those birthdays spent waiting for her to come home from work, the nights he stayed up late making plans for their future. But none of that mattered now. The cold, detached voice of Silas de Brienne still echoed in his mind, reminding him that Geneva was with him now, and not with Ethan. She had made her choice, and Ethan had no control over that. But as much as it hurt, he knew there was nothing he could do to change it. What was left to do now was to protect his daughters, to create a stable life for them, and to show them what it meant to endure when life throws its worst at you. The next day, the legal battle began. A week later, Ethan found himself in a courtroom. He stood facing Geneva, but there was no fury in his heart now. There was only a cold, calculated calm. He wasn't fighting out of anger anymore. This was a fight for what was right, a fight for the future of his children. He had the evidence, the paperwork, the recordings, everything. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about securing a future for his daughters that would be free from the chaos Geneva had dragged them into. Ethan was determined that they would not suffer the consequences of their mother's choices. They would not be left in a house filled with lies and deceit. As the court proceedings went on, Ethan listened to Geneva's defense. Her lawyer spoke of her emotional turmoil, her right to move on, but Ethan wasn't moved. He knew the truth, and it was enough. As the judge spoke, it became clear that Ethan had the upper hand. His daughters would remain with him, and Geneva's manipulations would no longer have a place in their lives. After the ruling was made, Ethan felt a sense of finality, but it wasn't triumph. There was no victory dance, no celebrating. There was only the quiet knowledge that the storm had passed and that he was now free to rebuild his life with his daughters. That night, Ethan stood alone, gazing out the window. He looked out at the same city that had once felt like home but now felt distant. He thought about the journey he had taken, the hardships, the betrayals, but also the strength it had given him. He had fought for his family, and he had won, not just the legal battle, but the battle to preserve what mattered most. It wasn't about the house, the possessions, or the wealth. It was about his daughters, the ones who had never wavered in their love for him. They were the reason he had fought, and they would always be his anchor. As he turned away from the window and walked toward his daughter's room, a sense of peace began to settle over him. It was quiet, but in that quiet, he felt a strength he hadn't known was possible. It was the strength of a man who had endured. who had faced the darkest of times and who had come out on the other side with his integrity intact. He walked into his daughter's room, their faces peaceful as they slept. He kissed them both on the forehead, a silent promise that no matter what, he would always be there for them. And as he left the room, he knew that while his past had been filled with pain, his future was something he could shape, something he could build. It would be a future filled with love, honesty, and the quiet strength of a father who refused to break. Ethan sat at his desk, the soft hum of the city outside his window providing an eerie contrast to the stillness inside the townhouse. It had been months since the divorce was finalized, and yet it still felt like a surreal dream. The documents, the court battles, the emotional toll, they were all behind him now, but there were days when the weight of it still lingered. He glanced over at the family pictures on the wall. Mira and Lena, both growing older, but the same light in their eyes, the same trust in their father's presence. His heart tightened. They were his anchor. He had come a long way since the day Geneva walked out of their lives. The pain had shifted from a jagged ache to something quieter, something he could breathe through. No longer did he feel like he was drowning in the chaos of her decisions, her lies. He had rebuilt his life piece by piece with determination, clarity, and a fierce love for his daughters. Ethan had grown in ways he never thought possible. Every evening when he tucked Lena and Mira into bed, there was a sense of peace he had never experienced before. They were safe, they were whole, and no matter what had happened in the past, they were together, and that was enough. The quiet of the house was both comforting and eerie. It was a reminder of the life he had fought for, the life he was building with his daughters. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of potential, full of the strength he had fought so hard to regain. There were moments, like when he was at the soccer games or sitting at the dinner table with them, when he could almost forget everything that had happened. But then the past would rise to the surface, whispers of Geneva's absence, the way she had walked away from them, from him. He couldn't change that, but he could shape the future. His future, their future. The phone buzzed on the desk, snapping Ethan out of his thoughts. It was Maria, his assistant. She was always the calm in the storm, keeping things organized, keeping him grounded. He answered, and the conversation was brief, but it was all he needed. Everything was moving forward smoothly. The custody paperwork had been finalized. His daughters were secure, both legally and emotionally. But something still lingered in the back of Ethan's mind, a letter that Maria had handed him weeks ago, a letter from Geneva. He had never opened it. He had no need to. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore, it was about moving on, yet curiosity tugged at him. What had she written? He stood up from his desk and walked over to the drawer where he had placed it, unopened. Holding the letter in his hands, he felt the weight of the decision to finally read it. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, the paper rustling in the quiet of the room. "Dear Ethan," it began. He hesitated for a moment, the words on the page blurring in his vision. "I know you may never read this, I don't expect you to, but I have to write it, for myself, if not for you. I've spent so long running from the truth, from myself. I convinced myself that leaving was the answer, that I could start over and find some semblance of peace, but I was wrong. I thought I was doing what was best for me, but I was hurting you, hurting our family, and for that, I will always regret it. You were right all along, Ethan. You were steady, you were strong, and I let my own insecurities lead me down a path of destruction. I don't expect you to forgive me, and maybe you never will, but I wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see before. You were the one who held us together, and I was the one who let it all slip away. I thought I wanted freedom, but what I really wanted was the kind of love you gave me, the kind of love that doesn't break, that doesn't fade. I have no excuses, no explanations. Just the truth. I failed you, and I failed our daughters. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make things right, but I am trying. I'm trying to become the person I should have been all along. I'm sorry, Ethan, more than I could ever express. Geneva." Ethan put the letter down, his hand lingering on the page. There was no anger, no rage, just a quiet sadness, the kind that comes with knowing the end of something important, something irreplaceable. He had already known this truth. He had already accepted it. What Geneva chose to do with her life was no longer his concern. What mattered was that his daughters were safe, they were thriving, and he was still there for them, always. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the room settle over him. The letter wasn't an answer to his pain. It wasn't a solution. But it gave him a sense of closure, a sense that she was facing her own truth in her own way. He could let go of that chapter now. He could turn the page. When he looked up again, he saw Mira standing in the doorway, her wide eyes curious. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled and nodded, pushing the emotions aside. He had learned to live with the weight of his choices, and now, more than ever, he was living for them. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady. "Everything's going to be okay." He walked over to her and pulled her into his arms, knowing that despite everything, he had done the right thing. For them, for himself. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about protecting the ones he loved, building a future from the pieces of their past, and standing firm in the face of everything that had tried to break him. Tomorrow he would take another step forward. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that the road ahead was wide open, full of possibility.